3 million pages of evidence, thousands of unsealed flight logs, millions of data points, names, themes, and timelines connected. You are listening to the Epstein Files, the world's first AI-native investigation into the case that traditional journalism simply could not handle.
Welcome back to the Epstein Files. Last time, we walked through how the operation functioned as a repeatable business model, with recruiting, transport, and payment structures that did not happen by accident. Today, we are following the physical site at Little St. James and testing what the records actually show about ownership, build-out, logistics, and access. As always, every document and source we reference is available at epsteinfiles.fm. So start with the USVI civil case file naming Plan D LLC, Great St. Jim LLC, and related entities, because that record is where the legal ownership map becomes concrete.
Precisely. And that word concrete is the right one because we're looking at a legal foundation.
Not just a piece of real estate.
No, not at all. The public thinks of Little St. James as a private island, a vacation home. But a forensic audit of the ownership papers, the permits, the corporate filings, specifically those in the USVI civil case ST20CV14, that image just dissolves.
And what takes its place?
A structure that looks less like a home and more like a portfolio of liability shields. The corporate machine built on a piece of land.
So let's start right there with that corporate veil. A high net worth individual might buy an island in their own name. Or maybe a simple family trust.
For inheritance, right. That's standard practice.
But the USVI case file, with exhibits from 2022 and even the 2025 releases, it lays out something completely different. This was never just Jeffrey Epstein's island.
No, it was a patchwork. A grid of LLCs.
Let's name them.
The primary entities that the civil case documents are Plan D, LLC, and Great St. Jim, LLC.
Just on its face, that's unusual. Two companies for one contiguous property.
It's a strategy. In forensic accounting, when you see a single operation divided like this, it's about containment.
Explain that.
If a crime or even just an accident happens on the land owned by Plan D, LLC,
The lawsuit stops there.
theoretically, the assets held by the other company, Great St. Jim, LLC, are insulated. They're legally separate. It fragments liability.
The names themselves are interesting. Great St. Jim is a clear reference to Great St. James, the other island he acquired. But Plan D...
Sounds like a contingency.
It implies a sequence. Plan A, B, C.
And then there are the subsidiaries listed in the Virgin Islands racketeering complaint. It's not just the real estate companies.
Right. We see Hyperion Air, LLC.
That's the aviation.
Nautilus, Inc., and Poplar, Inc.
So you have the real estate separated from the transport and both separated from other operations. If the jet is seized,
The island is safe.
if the island is sued,
The plane is safe. This isn't how you structure a vacation home.
this is how you structure a high-risk corporate operation to minimize damage.
And a structure this complex needs operators. It can't run itself. The USVI filings consistently point to two individuals.
Darren Indyke and Richard Kahn.
These are the fiduciaries.
Correct. The court filings designate them as executors of the estate and, critically, administrators of the 1953 trust.
We have to be very clear about what their role was. They weren't just outside lawyers.
Not even close. They were signatories. They held power of attorney. They were the firewall.
Let's unpack that distinction. Why is being a signatory so different from just being a lawyer?
A lawyer advises you. You make the final decision. You sign the check. A signatory with power of attorney can sign the check for you.
They can act as the principal.
They can incorporate an entity, move assets between Plan D and Great St. Jim, all without Epstein needing to be physically in the room or his name on the document. It creates a layer of separation.
Plausible deniability.
Or at least legal distance. The forensic note here is the operational discipline. This was not a sloppy arrangement. It was engineered separation.
And all of these engineered entities seem to lead to one place, the 1953 trust.
That's the capstone.
Yeah.
The USVI case documents how these LLCs were consolidated into this trust structure
So it centralizes control.
while fragmenting the liability.
Okay.
Exactly. An LLC filing is a public record. You can look it up, find the registered agent. A trust, especially a private trust, is a black box. Its bylaws, its beneficiaries, its ledgers, they're not in a public database.
So moving the LLCs into the trust makes them harder to track.
It complicates asset forfeiture, and it obscures the money trail.
The day-to-day operations, staffing, maintenance.
Right. If you want to know who was paid to repair a generator on Little St. James, you look for the payment record. If that payment comes from a centralized trust account labeled property maintenance,
It's anonymous. It's not tied directly to the island.
it becomes much harder to trace individual vendors or employees. The 1953 trust was an opacity engine. It was designed to make things disappear.
So we have the legal container, a fortress of paper. Let's shift to how people got into that fortress, the travel and access patterns. We're looking at the unredacted flight logs for the Boeing 727.
And various data compilations that analyze aviation patterns. The key here is the logistics of isolation.
A pattern emerges very quickly when you look at the
A
logs.
cadence. It's almost always the same route. Teterboro, New Jersey.
Then Palm Beach, Florida.
Then Cyril E. King Airport in St. Thomas. And then the final transfer.
It doesn't look like erratic personal travel, a whim to go to the Caribbean for a weekend.
No. The data shows a shuttle service cadence. It's regular. It's predictable.
It ran like a bus route.
It ran like a corporate shuttle, moving personnel and assets between operational nodes. The movement of the aircraft matched the needs of a facility that required a constant flow of people and supplies.
And access to that facility was completely controlled. This isn't a resort with a front desk.
Access was biologically verified, meaning you had to physically be on the manifest. There is no public ferry to Little St. James. No bridge.
The official paper trail, the FAA flight logs, they end in St. Thomas.
That's the public interface. The gap between that major airport and the island itself was bridged by private transport,
Helicopters and boats.
which creates a secondary, unlogged perimeter.
The FAA tracks the 727 from New Jersey. Who tracks the boat from St. Thomas?
Exactly. We have pilot logs for the jets.
Yeah.
We have good data on who landed in the USVI. But the manifest for that final boat ride, that's an internal document.
A data gap.
A significant one.
Yeah.
But even with that gap, we can analyze the jet manifests to understand the mix of people being funneled toward the island.
And this is where we have to perform a demographic audit, not get lost in celebrity gossip.
Correct. The forensic approach isn't about the famous names. It's about the categories of individuals on those flights, repeatedly.
We see three clear groups.
Group 1, high net worth individuals, business partners, potential donors, the financial engine.
Group 2, academics, scientists.
The legitimacy engine. It provides an intellectual cover for the gatherings.
And Group 3,
Females, often young, often with no discernible business role on a flight of financiers and physicists, often traveling in groups or brought by specific recruiters whose names appear again and again in the logs.
We also see discrepancies in the logs themselves, the use of codes or initials.
That's a classic red flag in any audit. A legitimate charter flight lists full names. An operation trying to obscure its passenger list might use JS, or a numerical code that corresponds to a private internal ledger.
So the record keeping itself is designed to be opaque.
Decipherable only to insiders. It appears mundane to an outside observer unless you have the key, unless you can cross-reference it with victim testimony or other documents.
So the legal structure is hidden. The transport is controlled. Let's move to the moment the government finally breaches the perimeter, the 2019 raid.
This is where we look at the FBI vault records, the indexes of seized materials. The chronology is critical.
Epstein is arrested on July 6, 2019, at Teterboro Airport in New Jersey.
But the search warrants for Little St. James and the Manhattan Mansion are executed after that.
If there's a gap.
A very significant operational gap. Between his arrest and the FBI forensic teams landing on that island, there was a window of time.
And in a secure facility like that, controlled by loyal staff.
A window of hours, let alone days, is an eternity. It's enough time to remove or destroy evidence.
But based on the FBI logs, they did seize a substantial amount.
They did. The inventory lists hard drives, loose media CDs, DVDs, and photo albums. The indexes give us the categories. Item 4, hard drive. Item 5, box of photos.
But here's the distinction the public often misses. The DOJ releases the inventory.
But not the content.
We know the container exists. We know they seized a hard drive.
We do not have the verified contents of that container in the public record. The raw video files, the image directories, the emails stored on that drive, that all remains largely sealed or redacted.
There's a set of photos that circulates online, often labeled as being from the raid. The source is sometimes listed as Epstein Island Pictures and Videos 03122-2025.
Those are not from the 2019 raid. That's a critical forensic point.
When were they taken?
The metadata shows they were mostly taken in October 2020, more than a year later.
So what are they?
They are site survey photos, likely taken by investigators or lawyers for the civil litigation, documenting the property's layout. They show empty rooms, furniture, the exterior of the temple.
They're architectural evidence.
Not operational evidence.
Yeah.
We must not confuse a photo of an empty room taken in 2020 with evidence of what happened in that room in 2005.
Following that timeline, let's move to the very end of Epstein's life, the estate and trust positioning. We have his last will and testament.
Signed August 8, 2019.
2 days before his death.
This document is the final move in the legal game we discussed earlier. The will explicitly directs that all residual assets be poured into one entity.
The 1953 trust.
This was not standard estate planning. It was an emergency accounting maneuver, a defensive fortification.
What's the defense?
If your assets are in an estate, they go through probate court. Probate is public. Anyone, journalists, victims, lawyers, can request the file.
But a trust is private.
By pouring everything into the trust just before death, the goal was to move the wealth out of the public sphere and into a private one. A trust is a private contract, not a public court proceeding.
There's a major discrepancy in the valuation, though. The will declares the value of the personal property at around $577 million.
But then you have Treasury Department reports, specifically from the Wyden investigation, which flagged transaction volumes connected to Epstein's accounts at over $1.1 billion.
That's a huge gap.
It's the difference between stock and flow. The will lists the static value of assets on that specific day. The Treasury reports track the flow, the total amount of money that moved through the accounts over a period of time.
So more than $1 billion passed through the machine.
And just over $500 million was left at the end. The forensic question is, where did the other $500 million go?
Operational costs, payments, profit-taking by partners.
We don't have the documentation for the outflow of that delta. We just know the volume was there. And the 1953 trust was the legal vehicle designed to keep those ledgers private.
Let's go back to the physical island. The construction and infrastructure. We have satellite imagery, drone footage, and the USVI permit filings. The most talked about structure is the temple.
From a forensic standpoint, we stick to what the imagery proves. We can confirm its location on a prominent point of the island. We can confirm its unusual painted exterior, the blue and white stripes that were later painted over. We can confirm heavy, industrial-style locking mechanisms on the door.
It doesn't look like a music pavilion or a meditation space.
It has the characteristics of a secure facility, a vault.
What about the claims of underground structures? Tunnels? Dungeons?
The public permit records filed with the USVI government show extensive excavation on the island. That is a documented fact.
But what were the permits for?
Cisterns and sewerage. Now, an off-grid island needs massive water storage, so cisterns are logical. The scale of the excavation, however, was industrial.
And a large underground concrete box can be called a cistern on a permit.
It can. Whether you fill it with water or furnish it for other purposes depends on what you do after the inspection. The drone footage shows large maintenance hatches consistent with underground utility access.
But we have to apply the strict audit constraint here.
We do. We do not have a blueprint in the public file labeled underground habitation level. We have permits for utilities. We can conclude the island was built to be self-sustaining and off-grid capable with massive generators and water storage. We cannot, based solely on the public permits, confirm the dungeon narrative.
This brings us to the most difficult part of the audit. The claims that remain unproven by the public record. The intelligence allegations.
There are specific assertions that the island was, in effect, an intelligence gathering operation, a honey trap. Certain analyses link the operation to foreign intelligence services and name high-profile political figures as being involved.
These are extraordinarily serious claims.
They are, and we can document certain pieces. The flight logs, for example, do place figures like former Israeli Prime Minister Ehud Barak on the island. That is a documented fact from the flight records.
But the visit is documented. The purpose of the visit is not.
That is the evidentiary gap. In a strict audit, you look for the paper trail that defines a relationship. We have the flight log showing a person was there. We have victim testimony alleging abuse occurred there. What we do not have in any unsealed USVI court record or released FBI manifest is a declassified document, a contract, a payment record from a foreign government to Jeffrey Epstein.
So we have a circumstantial case. The movement of powerful people, the presence of vulnerable people, the existence of surveillance, but no directive.
Exactly. The logistical footprint fits the profile of an intelligence operation. The isolation, the controlled access, the cameras, the specific mix of people. It looks like a trap. It functions like a trap. But as auditors of the official record, we must classify the state-sponsored claim as unproven by public documentation.
What about the central claim of such an operation, the blackmail archive?
We established that the FBI seized hard drives. The DOJ's disclosure logs prove the hardware exists. The physical devices were taken into evidence.
But the content?
The content has not been publicly released. We cannot verify if those drives contain a systematically organized blackmail library, or if they contain personal videos, or if they are encrypted beyond the FBI's ability to crack. The inventory proves the capacity for such an archive to exist. It does not prove the archive itself.
So let's synthesize the audit. What does the documentary evidence prove?
It proves that Little St. James was a legally insulated facility, using a maze of LLCs and a private trust to obscure ownership and cash flow.
It was logistically complex. A shuttle service of private jets and boats with controlled access, creating multiple perimeters.
It was physically fortified and capable of operating off-grid. It was funded through opaque transfers, with documented flows exceeding $1 billion, far more than the declared final assets.
And it was managed by a tight circle of fiduciaries, Indike and Kahn, who created legal distance for the principal.
And in the final hours, a deliberate legal maneuver, the last will, was executed to shield the remaining $500 million in assets from public probate proceedings.
So the documents prove a repeatable business model, a machine designed for abuse and concealment. That isn't a theory. It's in the legal filings and the financial records.
Correct. Regardless of who the ultimate client or beneficiary of the information gathered there was, the mechanism is what the documents show. It was built to capture people, it was built to hide what happened to them, and it was built to withstand legal scrutiny.
For decades.
For decades. And that brings us to the final provocative thought. If that 1953 trust was specifically designed to hide assets and transactions from the public probate process, what specific payments, what transfers from the years before 2019 are currently sitting in those private ledgers? The money trail didn't end, it just went private.
Next time, the Manhattan Mansion.
You have just heard an analysis of the official record. Every claim, name, and date mentioned in this episode is backed by primary source documents. You can view the original files for yourself at epsteinfiles.fm. If you value this data-first approach to journalism, please leave a 5-star review wherever you're listening right now. It helps keep this investigation visible. We'll see you in the next file.